It was a mild Saturday evening in early autumn. The air outside Margaret Parker's suburban home carried a light chill. But inside, the warmth of her kitchen wrapped everything in a soft comfort. The smell of roasted chicken, herbs, and baked potatoes filled the house, and the table was neatly set for three. Tonight, her daughter Emma was bringing her boyfriend, Ryan, over for dinner, something Margaret had both looked forward to and secretly dreaded. Ever since Emma had started dating Ryan, she'd spoken about him constantly. How kind he was, how patient, how hard he worked to support his dreams. Margaret had smiled each time, happy for her daughter. But there was always a mother's instinct that wanted to see for herself, to look this young man in the eyes and decide he truly cared for her daughter. When the doorbell rang, Margaret took a deep breath and opened the door. There he stood, tall, polite, neatly dressed, with kind brown eyes and a gentle smile. In his hand was a small bouquet of daisies. "Good evening, Mrs. Parker," he said with warmth. "Emma told me you like flowers, so I thought I'd bring you some." Margaret blinked in mild surprise, her heart softening instantly. Few young men remembered such small, thoughtful gestures anymore. "That's very sweet of you, Ryan," she said. "Please, come in." As he stepped inside, the light from the chandelier caught the edges of his hair, making him look almost golden. Margaret reminded herself not to stare. He was Emma's boyfriend, after all, but there was something about the calm way he carried himself that drew attention. Naturally, Emma came rushing down the stairs, her blonde hair bouncing. "Mom, you met Ryan already?" she said, smiling brightly. Ryan chuckled. "I was just introducing myself." The two of them looked happy, truly happy. And for a moment, Margaret felt something pure and fulfilling, the joy of seeing her daughter loved by someone decent. Dinner began easily. They talked about Emma's new job, Ryan's photography hobby, and Margaret's work at the local library. The conversation flowed effortlessly. Ryan listened with genuine interest to every word, asking thoughtful questions. His tone never rushed. Margaret found herself talking more than she expected, sharing stories about her late husband, about how Emma used to run barefoot through the garden when she was little. Ryan smiled at all the right moments, never interrupting, always listening. As the night went on, the laughter grew louder, the room cozier. Margaret hadn't felt this kind of warm, family-like energy in years. After her husband's passing, dinners had been quiet, routine, lonely. But now, for the first time in a long while, there was life again, laughter bouncing off the walls. A spark of togetherness that filled the emptiness she had long stopped noticing. When dinner ended, Emma went upstairs to grab a photo album she wanted to show Ryan. "Don't go anywhere," she called playfully before disappearing. Ryan smiled and offered to help Margaret clear the table. She tried to refuse, saying, "You're a guest, dear. Sit down." But he insisted. "You've cooked such a lovely meal. It's the least I can do." They began clearing plates together. The kitchen was quiet except for the clinking of dishes and the soft hum of the refrigerator. Margaret could sense Ryan's calmness even in silence. It reminded her of the way her husband used to be, steady and kind without needing to fill every second with words. As she reached for a plate, her fingers brushed against Ryan's. It was a fleeting touch, completely innocent, but the warmth of it startled her. She looked up instinctively, and he was already watching her. Not in any improper way, just with a softness that seemed to say, "Thank you for the evening, for the care, for the effort. You remind me of my mom," Ryan said quietly, breaking the silence. His voice carried something deeper, grief. Margaret tilted her head gently. "Oh, that's kind of you to say." Ryan smiled faintly. "She passed away 2 years ago. She used to talk just like you, calm, kind, and patient. You made me feel like I was home again tonight." The air grew still. Margaret's heart tightened with empathy. "I'm sorry, Ryan," she said softly. "Losing a parent leaves a hole nothing ever fills." Ryan nodded, his eyes distant for a moment. Then, as if realizing the weight of his words, he smiled politely. "But thank you for tonight. You don't know how much it means. Margaret didn't know what to say, so she simply smiled back. There was something genuine in the way he looked at her. Not romantic, not inappropriate, just sincere. Still, it made her feel something she hadn't in years noticed. Not as a mother, not as a widow, but as a person. Just then, Emma returned, laughing as she flipped through old photos. "Look at this one, Ryan," she said, showing a picture of herself missing her front teeth. Ryan laughed softly. "You were adorable," he said. Margaret joined them, the brief moment of intensity fading away. But later, when Ryan and Emma left and the house returned to silence, Margaret found herself sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the daisies he'd brought. There was nothing wrong with what had happened. No lines crossed, no words said that shouldn't have been. Yet her heart felt oddly restless. It wasn't about attraction, she told herself. It was about warmth, the warmth of being appreciated, of feeling seen again. In the following days, Ryan began visiting more often. Sometimes to pick up Emma, sometimes to drop her off. Every time, he greeted Margaret with the same genuine smile and small talk about work, photography, or even the weather. He was always respectful, always kind. And each time, Margaret noticed how easy it was to talk to him. Easier than with most people her own age. One afternoon, while Emma was running late, Ryan waited in the living room. Margaret brought him tea, and they began chatting again, this time about life, dreams, and how unpredictable love could be. Ryan spoke about how he'd struggled after losing his mother and how Emma had helped him find joy again. Margaret listened, feeling proud of her daughter, but also quietly moved by the depth of his honesty. Then, for a brief moment, their eyes met, and Margaret saw a reflection of her younger self in him, that longing to be understood, to find peace. It wasn't attraction she felt, not truly. It was connection, a rare, unspoken understanding between two people who'd both lost something precious in life. When Emma finally came downstairs, laughing as always, the moment dissolved naturally. But the quiet warmth lingered in Margaret's heart. That night, Stitchy sat by her bedroom window, watching the leaves fall outside. She told herself she was reading too much into simple things, that kindness could exist without meaning anything more. Still, her mind replayed Ryan's words from that night. "You made me feel like I was home again." She didn't know why that one sentence stayed with her. Maybe because home was something she'd been missing too. Not the place, but the feeling. The warmth of being cared for. The peace of being understood. For the first time in years, she looked in the mirror and saw not just a tired woman or a mother, but someone still capable of feeling deeply, of connecting, of being human beyond the roles she carried. Margaret didn't know what the coming weeks would bring. But one thing was certain, her heart had quietly awakened to something new, something tender. And though she didn't understand it fully yet, she could feel the story of it beginning to write itself in the soft, silent spaces of her life. The following week moved faster than Margaret expected. Autumn deepened, painting the trees gold and red, and life returned to its quiet rhythm. Morning coffee, library shifts, evening walks, and the soft hum of loneliness that always seemed to sit beside her. But now there was something new, a small flicker of anticipation each time she heard a car pull into the driveway. Wondering if it was Emma and Ryan. One Thursday afternoon, Emma called from work. "Mom, can you do me a huge favor? Ryan's car broke down near our office and I have to stay late for a meeting. Could you pick him up and drop him at the repair shop? He feels bad asking." Margaret hesitated for a second, then smiled. "Of course, honey. Tell him I'll be there soon." When she reached the office, Ryan was waiting near the parking lot, wearing a dark jacket and that familiar, grateful smile. "You really didn't have to, Mrs. Parker," he said as he opened the passenger door. "Emma told me you're busy." "Was just finishing work," she replied lightly. "It's no trouble." They drove in comfortable silence at first, the late afternoon sun spilling golden light across the dashboard. Then Ryan began to talk, not about himself this time, but about Emma. "She's been working so hard," he said, looking out the window. "I worry she's exhausting herself." Margaret nodded. "She's always been like that. Ever since she was little, she wanted to do everything perfectly." Ryan smiled. That's exactly what I love about her. But sometimes I think she forgets to slow down and just breathe. Margaret understood that too well. Emma had her father's drive and sometimes his stubbornness. The rest of the drive passed easily. But when they reached the repair shop, the mechanic said it would take an hour to finish the car. Ryan looked apologetic. Would you mind waiting with me? I can grab us some coffee next door. Margaret agreed. They walked to a small cafe across the street, the kind with soft music and the smell of cinnamon in the air. Ryan ordered 2 cappuccinos and handed one to her. You take sugar, right? He asked. She blinked, surprised. How did you know that? He smiled. I noticed last time at dinner. Was such a small detail, yet it caught her off guard how attentive he was. They sat by the window, watching people pass by. Their talk turned to simple things. Books, movies, the little moments that make up a quiet life. Ryan had an easy way of speaking, open but never heavy, kind without being overbearing. Then his tone shifted slightly. Mrs. Parker, can I tell you something personal? Of course, she said softly. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Sometimes I feel like I don't fit in with people my age. Everyone's rushing, parties, noise, distractions. I like quiet things. I like people who... Listen, Margaret smiled faintly. There's nothing wrong with that. The world moves too fast anyway. He looked at her then, and for a brief moment, his gaze held something warm, not romantic, not inappropriate, but deeply human. You remind me of the kind of calm I've been missing, he said. Talking to you feels easy, like I don't have to pretend. Margaret felt her breath catch slightly. His words were kind. There was something in his voice that reached her heart, a quiet sincerity that stirred emotions she hadn't expected. Before she could respond, the mechanic called to say the car was ready. They finished their coffee, and as they stood, Ryan lightly touched her hand. It was meant as a polite gesture, but it lingered just a heartbeat too long. Margaret froze, not because it was wrong, but because it felt so familiar, so comforting. That her heart gave a quick, confused flutter. Ryan immediately realized it, pulling back with an apologetic smile. Sorry, I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. You didn't, she said quickly, her voice steady, though her pulse wasn't. It's all right. The drive home was quiet. Neither spoke much, yet something invisible hung in the air, an awareness they couldn't name. One neither of them had intended, but both had felt. When they reached her house, Ryan thanked her again. You're always so kind to me, he said. Emma's lucky to have a mother like you. Margaret smiled, forcing herself to keep things normal. Drive safely, Ryan. But when she stepped inside, she leaned against the door, trying to calm her racing heart. What is happening to me? She thought. It wasn't attraction in the physical sense. It was something gentler, older, and somehow lonelier. It was the feeling of being seen, heard, appreciated, things she had long stopped expecting from anyone. Over the next few weeks, Margaret tried to shake it off. She busied herself with work, gardening, calls with friends. But Ryan kept visiting, always polite, always kind. And every time he'd say something that touched her heart in small, unexpected ways. One Sunday afternoon, he came by to help Emma with her laptop. Margaret was baking in the kitchen when Ryan peeked in. That smells amazing, he said. Apple pie. She laughed softly. You've got a good nose. May I help? He offered. I'm terrible at cooking, but maybe you can teach me. She hesitated but handed him the rolling pin. They worked side by side, laughing when he made the crust too thick. At one point, their hands brushed again, brief, but enough to send a soft jolt through her chest. She quickly stepped back, pretending to check the oven later. As they waited for the pie to bake, Ryan leaned on the counter. It's funny, he said. I've known Emma for almost a year, but I feel like I understand her better after talking to you. Margaret smiled. That's what mothers do. We explain the parts they forget to show. Ryan chuckled. Maybe, but you do it in a way that makes people want to listen. She met his eyes for a second, and that same unspoken connection passed between them, a quiet understanding that neither dared to acknowledge. That evening, after he and Emma left, Margaret sat on the couch, her mind restless. It wasn't guilt she felt, exactly more confusion. She knew boundaries, knew where right and wrong lived. But emotions were never that simple. Sometimes the heart wandered before the mind could stop it. The next time she saw Ryan, it was by accident. She was at the local farmer's market when she spotted him browsing a flower stall. He turned, surprised but pleased. "Mrs. Parker, what are the odds?" They talked for a while, laughing about the coincidence. Then he picked up a small bunch of white lilies and handed them to her. "For you," he said simply. "You once said you liked flowers that looked peaceful." Margaret blinked, touched. "You remember that?" "I remember everything you say," he replied. Almost shyly, her heart skipped a beat. For a moment, the world seemed to blur. The voices, the crowd, everything, until all she saw was the kindness in his eyes. Then, realizing how that must look, she quickly looked away. "That's very thoughtful, Ryan. Thank you." When she got home, she placed the lilies in a vase on the kitchen counter. Their scent filled the air, delicate and pure. And yet, every time she looked at them, her heart stirred in ways she didn't understand. That night, she couldn't sleep. She replayed the day over and over, questioning herself. She wasn't doing anything wrong, she knew that. But her emotions, quiet as they were, had begun to shift. She admired Ryan's kindness, his depth, his respect. But admiration had turned into something softer, more dangerous. Not love, not longing, but an ache she couldn't name. A few days later, Emma mentioned casually that she and Ryan were taking a short break. "Just some space," she'd said, brushing it off. Margaret didn't ask questions, but her heart gave a strange, uneasy twist. That evening, there was a knock on the door. When she opened it, Ryan stood there, rain on his jacket and a troubled look in his eyes. "I'm sorry for coming unannounced," he said. "Emma told you, didn't she?" Margaret nodded. "Come in. You look like you could use some tea." He stepped inside, silent for a long while. Finally, he said, "I care about her deeply. But lately, I think we're both lost. She wants different things, and I don't even know what I want anymore." Margaret listened quietly, her heart heavy. "Relationships are complicated," she said gently. "Sometimes caring isn't enough." He looked at her then, eyes full of emotion. "You always know what to say," he whispered before she could respond. He reached out and took her hand, just a small, desperate gesture seeking comfort. Margaret froze, her breath catching as warmth rushed through her. "Ryan." She began softly, but he shook his head. "I'm sorry. I just needed someone who understands." His voice was steady, but his eyes said everything he couldn't put into words. And in that fragile moment, Margaret realized something she never thought she would. Her heart wasn't racing because of what was happening. It was racing because it shouldn't be. The following days were a storm Margaret couldn't escape, not because of what happened, but because of how it made her feel. Ryan's hand had lingered in hers for just a moment, yet the warmth of it stayed long after he'd left. She replayed it again and again, wondering what it meant. She wasn't a foolish woman. She knew boundaries. She knew right from wrong. But she also knew that her heart had begun to stir in ways she hadn't felt in years, not with passion, but with presence. Someone had seen her again. That night, the house was quiet. Rain tapped against the windows, and the scent of lilies, the ones Ryan had given her, still filled the kitchen. She sat by the table, staring at them, feeling both gratitude and confusion. She wasn't angry with him. She was angry with herself for letting her emotions wander. The next morning, she called Emma. "How are you, sweetheart?" "Busy." Emma sighed. "Ryan and I talked again. We both need time." "He's a good guy, Mom, but maybe we just met at the wrong stage in life." Margaret's chest tightened. "I see. I'm sorry, honey." "Don't be," Emma said quickly. "It's not a breakup, just a pause. I think he needs to figure things out, and so do I." When the call ended, Margaret stood by the window, her reflection faint against the cloudy sky. She whispered to herself, "He's just a boy. And I'm his girlfriend's mother." The very thought made her feel foolish, but it didn't stop her from caring. 2 days later, Rian stopped by to return a few things Emma had left in his car. Margaret met him at the door, unsure how to act. He looked tired, his usual calm replaced with something heavier. "Come in," she said, her tone soft. He hesitated. "I don't want to intrude." "You're not," she replied, stepping aside. Inside, the air felt still. He placed the box on the coffee table, then sat down, rubbing his temples. "I didn't plan to stay long. I just didn't know where else to go today." Margaret poured him tea. "Then you did the right thing." They sat in silence for a while before he spoke again. "I think Emma's right. We want different things. She's chasing her future, and I—" He trailed off, then looked at her, his eyes searching hers. "I just want something real. Something that feels steady." Margaret felt her chest tighten again. She could hear the longing in his voice, the same kind she'd once had at his age, when she believed love could fix anything. "Real things take time," she said quietly, "and sometimes they come when you're not looking." He nodded slowly. Then, after a pause, he whispered, "That's what it felt like with you." Margaret's breath caught. The words hung in the air like a fragile thread. "Ryan," she said softly, "you're hurt and confused. Don't say something you'll regret later." "I'm not confused," he said firmly. "You've shown me kindness when I needed it most. You listen. You care. It's not about age or anything else. It's about how you make me feel." Her heart pounded, not out of excitement, but from the weight of what was happening. She stood up, needing distance. "Ryan, please stop!" He rose too, his voice gentle. "I know. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make things complicated. It's just," he took a breath, "you make me feel safe, like home." Those words broke something inside her, because deep down, she understood. For years, she'd given love to her husband, to her daughter, but she'd forgotten what it felt like to receive it. She turned away, blinking back tears. "You don't owe me those words," she said quietly. "What you feel is gratitude, not love. One day, you'll see the difference." He didn't argue. Instead, he nodded slowly, his eyes soft with understanding. "Maybe you're right. But I'll still remember you not as Emma's mother, but as someone who reminded me what kindness feels like." With that, he left. The door closed softly behind him, leaving a silence that echoed through the house. Margaret sank onto the couch, her hands trembling. She wasn't ashamed. She hadn't crossed any lines. But her heart hurt, not because of what did happen, but because of what almost did. Over the next few weeks, life returned to its quiet rhythm again. The days grew colder, the trees barer. Emma visited often, her energy filling the house. She and Ryan eventually spoke again, this time with calm acceptance. They decided to remain friends, realizing they'd both learned something from each other. Ryan said he's moving to Portland for a new job. Emma told her one day over lunch. He sounded happy. Margaret smiled faintly. "That's good. He deserves that." "He said you helped him through a rough time," Emma added. "You're always like that, Mom. People feel safe with you." Margaret's throat tightened, but she managed a small smile. "That's what mothers are for." That evening, when Emma left, Margaret walked into the kitchen. The lilies were long gone, but she remembered their scent vividly. She brewed herself a cup of tea and sat by the window. Outside, the snow had begun to fall, soft and slow, covering everything in white. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel lonely. She felt alive. Not because of Ryan, but because she had remembered something she'd forgotten. That love doesn't always come to stay. Sometimes it just passes through to remind you that your heart still works. Months passed. Margaret returned to her simple routines. Occasionally, she'd get a postcard, one from Portland, another from Seattle, always signed with gratitude. Ryan. There was never anything more, never anything improper, only warmth and respect. Each card brought a small smile to her face, proof that what they shared wasn't wrong. It was human. It's people crossing paths at the right time. Helping each other remember what connection felt like. One spring morning, Emma came by with news. She'd met someone new. His name was Daniel, kind and steady. And Margaret could see from her daughter's eyes that this time it was different. "Mom," Emma said one evening, "Daniel wants to meet you. We're having dinner next week." Margaret nodded, her heart full. "I'd love that." When Emma left, Margaret sat in the quiet house once again, her eyes drifting toward the vase by the window, now filled with fresh white daisies. She thought of Ryan for a brief moment, wondering if he ever found what he was looking for. Then she smiled softly. Maybe he had. Maybe she had too. That night, as she wrote in her journal, she finally found the words she had been searching for. Sometimes life gives us unexpected moments, not to start a new story, but to close an old one gently. Ryan reminded me that my heart is still capable of warmth, even after all the years of quiet. And for that, I'll always be grateful. The story didn't end with romance. It ended with peace. And when Emma brought Daniel over the next week, and laughter filled the house again, Margaret realized something simple but profound. Love isn't always about possession or permanence. Sometimes it's just about presence. That night, as she stood at the window, watching the moonlight spill across the lawn, she whispered into the silence, "Thank you, Ryan, for reminding me what it means to feel again." Then she turned off the lights, her heart finally still, her spirit at ease.